This is The Toss-Up, where an expert line panel dissects the hottest stories within the world of sports. From some of the nation's strongest college programs right here in Bloomington to the games and moments that capture the world's attention, it's all right here on The Toss-Up. Every sport has its stars, its legends, and the heroes. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to one question. Who's the best? It seems like such a simple question. Player A is better than player B, and here's why, yada, yada. But of course, it's not that easy. It can't be. Which numbers are the most important? Can you still be the best if you lose? And as the games themselves evolve and move forward, does history, in essence, get left behind? And of course, we could spend hours and even days debating the best from every sport known to man all around the world. But as fun as it would be for me to discuss Lin Dan's dominance in badminton, that's not why we're here today. We're here for the big three American sports: football, baseball, and basketball. We'll examine the best of today. We'll look at the Hall of Famers from generations past. But this week, the Hall of Fame just isn't good enough. We're looking for the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Toss-Up. I'm Drew Fry, and I'm joined here with IUS TV's very own Mike Moskaluk and Stephen Walker, and we're ready to discuss these GOATs, the best ever. So, Mike, I want to start with you, and we're going to start off by talking NFL. Just some of the best players off the top of your head. Who do you think, we'll start on the defensive end of things. The best defensive player the NFL has ever seen, could be from now, could be from generations past. Who do you have?
Okay, so it's interesting because for me, football is one of those one of those sports where it's really weird because the positions are so different in nature. It's not like basketball where everyone dribbles, everyone passes, everyone shoots. It's not like baseball where everyone fields, everyone hits. It's not even like hockey where everyone's skating, passing the puck, whatever. Football, it's some people are pass rushing, some people are defending, some people are throwing the ball, catching, whatever. So when it comes to best defensive player of all time for me, it's who can have the most impact on a game. And I have to say, in my opinion, it's someone I never got the chance to see play. It's Lawrence Taylor, the former New York Giant. And not only were his stats great, and not only would any player who played against him tell you he was absolutely terrifying to line up against when you knew he was blitzing, there's just some incredible stories surrounding him. He played for Bill Parcells, and his defensive coordinator / linebackers coach was none other than Bill Belichick. And there's plenty of stories of him showing up late to meetings or just not listening to the play call and blitzing the quarterback. And every single time he would get away with it because he's LT, right? You can't get mad at LT. He's LT. There was one time Belichick called him out in a meeting for being 5 minutes late. They end the meeting. Bill Parcells goes up to him and he says, You yell at LT for being late to practice? And Bill Belichick goes, yeah, he was 5 minutes late. And he goes, why'd you start the meeting without him? So to me, Lawrence Taylor is the best defensive football player of all time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you see that it's obviously the stats are important, but a lot of it's the legacy, just having those sort of defining moments and that reputation.
Right.
And Stephen, I want to send it over to you. LT is one of the big options out there. Do you have someone different? Do you think it's definitely him, the best defensive player in the NFL?
This is one of those situations where I wish I took that chair before so I could go first, because I was going to say Lawrence Taylor because, I mean, like you're saying, he's just one of the most dominant forces we've ever seen on the football field on either side. And just like he's the last defensive player to win the MVP award. That's just how good he was at playing defense, doing his job. And another accolade is one career-ending Joe Theismann injury. So he's just such a force getting to the quarterback. But looking at other positions, like it's such a game with all these different, you have different sets on what you're doing, what your job is. I mean, Deion Sanders is one of the greatest cornerbacks we've ever seen. Just an absolute ball hawk, always got his man, just glued to his hip, not really letting receivers get open, intercepting a lot of passes. And when he has to, he's so quick getting down the field prime, just absolutely all over the place. He's a guy. And then you've got for safeties, Ed Reed is one of the greatest safeties in the game ever. I've personally got to see him, and even before I got to see him, like just one of the hardest hitting players that we've ever seen. And I mean, he's not like a huge guy, but he could absolutely wreak havoc from the safety position. So those are two guys in the last, 20, 30 years at least. But I mean, there's so many different players that we could choose from.
Yeah, and I mean, if I hadn't gone Lawrence Taylor, like Stephan said, I mean, you really do have Deion Sanders, Ed Reed. If you want to talk Revis Island, Darrelle Revis, I know there was one season, I want to say it's either 07 or 08. The list of wide receivers he lined up against is like, I think 10 out of the 16 were Hall of Famers or Hall of Fame caliber, and he held almost every single one under 100 yards, under 10 receptions, and like 1 touchdown or less, which is ludicrous guarding top receivers in the NFL. So I agree with Stephan. I think there are so many great options, but really I think we can both agree it's like Lawrence Taylor, and then there's
Lawrence
like
Taylor,
all
and
these
then
great
choose
players.
anyone from the field.
Right.
We're all on the same page.
And
there.
then, as you both alluded to, though, it seems like the MVP awards and some of the dominance, it's more focused on the offensive end of things. So who do you think are some of the best offensive players? Mike, we'll start with you again. And how do they compare to someone like Lawrence Taylor if you're talking about the best football player of all time?
Well, I mean, it's tough because obviously the easy answer is Tom Brady, right?
Is
like,
it?
Greatest winner,
Yeah.
whatever, has the nice stats.
He's got the Super Bowls.
Has got a lot of the records. But for me personally, the greatest offensive player of all time actually isn't even a quarterback. For me, it's a running back. And it's the absolutely insane Bob Sanders that was in Detroit.
Okay.
And he is unbelievable. Or sorry, Barry Sanders, not Bob Sanders.
That
Bob
makes
Sanders
more
is
sense.
a safety, I'm pretty
That
sure.
makes sense. I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't
that's my
remember a
bad.
Bob
Barry
Sanders, but I'll take
Bob
your word
Sanders.
for it.
And so he was just an absolute animal. He would put up insane rushing numbers, but he just got so tired of playing for the Lions that he just said, I'm done playing, and retired early. And everyone was stunned by it. And so I think he was the greatest of all time, and even though he doesn't have the longevity, because he is maybe the greatest case of all time in sports of, if this guy keeps playing, like, can anyone catch his records? But he was just so tired of playing for the Detroit Lions, he was like, I've had enough of this.
Wow. Stephan, I know he mentioned Brady at first, and you seemed a little bit opposed to that, but who would you put as sort of your top tier?
Not exactly opposed to Brady. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, and the longevity is he's still playing well into his 40s, and I don't see him stopping anytime soon. But best offensive all time, I mean, Barry's a great pick because if he only played for 9 seasons, if he plays longer, 15, he's going to hold every single record imaginable for a running back. But I'm going to go to a different position, wide receiver, Jerry Rice. The greatest wide receiver, you can't argue it. There's no.
So I do argue that.
I don't think
disagree,
you can.
honestly.
I think it's the same as Barry Sanders, where he holds, or if he had kept playing, could hold all the records. Jerry Rice holds all the records for a wide receiver. He's got the most catches, the most yards, most touchdowns, and he's got himself a handful of Super Bowls as well, playing a long career himself. I don't see. I have an idea on who you could go for, but I think Jerry Rice is just the number one wide receiver we've ever seen.
So I'm sure it will be the person you think I would go for, and it is Randy Moss.
Okay, so there.
Out
all
of
right.
Marshall University. And the only argument I have is, yes, Jerry Rice has all the records, but if you go into the records and you look at receiving yards and touchdowns, and you go by age, so the year they were 21, the year they were 22, so on and so forth. Randy Moss leads in almost every single year until about 32, 33. And then it's all Jerry Rice until about the age of 42, 43. One of the oldest wide receivers we've ever seen in NFL history. And it just so happens he played for one of the greatest offenses with the San Francisco 49ers, Joe Montana, Steve Young. Randy Moss was getting the ball thrown to him by Dante Culpepper, by random Minnesota Vikings QBs that would go in when their guys would get hurt. He was playing on bad Raiders teams. He was playing at the end of his career on a bad Tennessee Titans team. His best year as a wide receiver, funny enough, is the only year he has a very good QB, the likes of a Steve Young or a Joe Montana, in Tom Brady, 2007, and he breaks the record for passing TDs caught in a single season at the end of his career in his mid-30s. So to me, Randy Moss is better but we just never got to see him have the same counting stats because he didn't play with 2 Hall of Fame QBs for most of his career.
That's a good point. And my favorite Randy Moss stat is, was it the Thanksgiving game
Yep.
where he had 3 catches, 3
Yep.
touchdowns, well over 100 yards?
180 yards or something.
I mean, that's something that I don't think we'll ever see again. So I mean, we can sit there and we can compromise on a good 1 and 2. We
Yeah.
might not solve who's actual one, but the good that's
I'd agree.
that's an easy one too.
And
Yeah, we've got our top
unquestionably, Jerry Rice
Easy one
would
too.
be
And
my
if we
number
were gonna talk about the best quarterback, which we haven't, I do think it's got. I mean, it does have to be Tom Brady,
2.
right?
It has to, because you look at it, and
The
I
Super
mean,
Bowls are
Breeze
important,
might
right?
have some numbers, but a lot of that is how many bad defenses they have in the Saints, where throughout the years, the whole second half, he would throw the ball about 30 times. Peyton Manning, you can make the argument, but I think, and it sucks for Peyton, I think his team kind of does him in on the argument, because he just, every single time Tom Brady and Peyton Manning face each other in a meaningful game, it just seemed like Tom Brady came out on top. And I think, while football is such a team game, I think that ends up mattering in the debate, is that when they go head-to-head, what happens? And I think it is Brady, just because he won so many of those.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And usually those Patriots years, I mean, he was doing it with like former grocery store baggers. Like,
Yeah.
And now he's got some actual weapons on the Bucs, and they're having a great year already, leading their conference. So
Yeah.
we'll see how we can do. And I mean, I expect him to play for 3-4 more years.
Yeah, as he
Yeah.
continues to age. Yeah, so we've touched on a lot of football and the whole range of that. Now I want to shift over into Major League Baseball, which probably got the longest tenure of players that we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, I want to talk about some of the old school players first. And I've started with you a lot, so I'm going to go over to Stephan. I'll give you your first crack at this one. Who would you put as the best of the old school, before the modern era, of guys that, I mean, none of us will have ever been able to see in person, but just know the legacies of?
So don't know where to start. If I had to start on the pitching side of things, I think you got to say Walter Johnson's the greatest pitcher in the entire sport, and that might be another thing, like you were talking about with Jerry Rice, how he just had the longevity because he pitched in an era where there wasn't pitch counts and there no analytics. You pitched until your arm fell off your body. But
Basically.
he holds almost virtually every record for a pitcher. That's never going to be broken. On the offensive side, I mean, so many great players in the 1900s. You got guys like Ty Cobb, who were absolute offensive units, hitting a lot of home runs, a lot of stolen bases. I mean, Ty Cobb still holds the batting average record, and I don't know if that's ever going to be shattered for a career. Got guys like Babe Ruth, who set a lot of records. But old schoolers, I'm going to say Willie Mays is one of the best old school players that we've ever seen, because he can do it on both sides. He's extremely quick. He's one of the greatest center fielders in the history of the sport, making some of the greatest catches we've ever seen. The over-the-shoulder catch at the Polo Grounds is, I think, that's iconic.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know a moment bigger than that. And I mean, he could get it done with the bat as well, hitting so many home runs, just having a lot of hits in his career, high averages. I don't know if we've seen a guy like Willie Mays who's as well-rounded as he was from offense and defense. So I think he would be my pick for the overall offensive side of the ball for the best player.
Yeah, Willie Mays was a true five-tool player. I mean, the epitome of that. And so, Mike, a lot of other names that Stephan hasn't mentioned, but who would you say is sort of your top group, maybe 2 or 3 guys that are the best old schoolers?
I think it's tough because a lot of old school baseball, obviously there was the segregation in baseball, so that you had the Negro Leagues, but they had some incredible players in Satchel Paige, Bob Gibson. I know I'm missing a couple, or Josh Gibson, sorry.
Yes.
I know I'm missing a couple more, but in terms of the old school players who played in the real MLB, I think all your answers are great. I think my answer is probably like old school, Babe Ruth, because how can you go against
the
guy?
legacy.
He's the legacy. He's the urban legend of baseball, in all honesty.
Yes.
Like, when you talk about the history of baseball, you can't not bring up Babe Ruth and the 20s Yankees. And so I think it has to be Babe Ruth, but if I got to be honest, my runner-up is Honus Wagner. I obviously have never seen him play.
Really?
So,
you weren't
yeah,
you weren't around then?
It was a little bit before my time. I don't
just
know
missed
if you,
it?
I don't know if you would know. But I think just all the stories I hear about him, I've read all this stuff about what an insane fielder he was, how he had such an eye at the plate. Just from everything I've read, it seems like he's a guy where if baseball had been, I don't know, a bigger deal back then, where they would hype, it was kind of right before Babe Ruth, right? Because that's kind of when baseball became really mainstream, where everyone was like, we got to follow what this Ruth guy is doing. So I think if Honus Wagner comes around maybe like 20 years later, maybe we talk about him a lot more.
Yeah, but I mean, with guys like Ruth and their legacy, and Wagner and the legacy as well, how do you compare that to some of these modern guys now as the game continuously evolves? Because if you took 1920s Babe Ruth and stuck him up against Clayton Kershaw or Blake Snell or any of the aces of today, it would not go well.
No.
So how do you compare his legacy to guys who are still pitching today or still hitting today or recently retired, some of the modern greats, Stephen?
Real quick, though, just wanted to bounce back to Babe Ruth real quick. I can't deny the numbers. And as a Yankees fan, I hate to say it, but he just played against a bunch of other chubby white guys,
Yeah.
which you can't blame him for because
Yeah,
obviously the game just keeps evolving.
And
so
you can only play who's presented
exactly.
to you.
You play so that. I mean, you can't argue the records like you're saying. But anyway, just want to throw that out there real quick. But new school. I mean, I think Mike Trout. Mike Trout's going to go down as one of the greatest to ever touch the baseball field, because he's like you mentioned when I said Willie Mays, how he was one of the original 5-tool players. Mike Trout is the epitome of a 5-tool player. And now I know you like the Dodgers. Mookie Betts is making a case for himself as one of the best. But going back a little farther, I mean, Albert Pujols is one of the greatest players of, the past couple decades. And the numbers speak for themselves playing with the Cardinals. And now as he's playing for the Angels, I mean, his numbers have obviously dipped as he gets older. But I don't see how you can't really argue much with Albert Pujols making a case for himself with all that, with the MVP awards he's won, the World Series he's won with the Cardinals. He's going to go down as one of the greatest first basemen we've ever seen.
Yeah, and with someone like Mike Trout, how do you compare someone who he hasn't had any real postseason experience? He hasn't won yet, so
That's not
his
his
legacy.
fault.
It's not, but at the same time, Tom Brady's now one of the best football players ever because he has 6 Super Bowl rings. How do you balance that out?
I think baseball is one of those sports where winning doesn't matter as much. And I know that sounds crazy because, yes, winning matters in every sport, obviously, right? But baseball players get to go out and show how good they are 162 times a year, every single year for the most part. Whereas football players, basketball players, hockey players, before playoffs, at most, you're getting 82, so half of that. So to me, yeah, the playoffs hurt, obviously, but I think the reason playoffs matter so much in other sports is you get to see maybe so little of players in certain markets or whatnot during the regular season, and then during the postseason, they get 1 or 2 moments, and it has to matter because there are so many teams who make it, you just can't screw up in the playoffs. Whereas I think Mike Trout, a guy like that, I mean, it's hard to compare him, obviously, to the great winners because he doesn't have those counting stats. But at the same time, sometimes you just got to look at the circumstances and just have to chalk it up to that. Because, I mean, if we can agree Peyton Manning's one of the greatest of all time and he got the 1 title, but there obviously, I mean, his own brother had 2 more. And I don't think anyone's saying Eli's better just because he had more playoff success. But I do think it hurts Mike Trout in the long run. And honestly, that's why my current GOAT that's currently playing is Mookie Betts. Is in the past 4 years, pretty much every statistical category, he's performed better than Trout. And so as long as that keeps going, to me, I think Mookie's the best current day. And you mentioned Albert Pujols, and I'd like to throw in a first baseman, early 2000s blast from the past. Good old Miguel Cabrera from the Detroit Tigers, Miami Marlins fame.
Miguel's
every single year you could chalk him in for 300 batting average, 25 home runs, and 100 RBIs, like clockwork.
And he's really one of the greatest just pure hitters that we've seen in the past 20 years.
I mean, only Triple Crown recently to my memory, right?
Right, on the hitting side of things, yes.
And I can't really agree with you on the Mookie Betts thing, only because if you switch Betts and Trout, you put Trout on the Red Sox team that Betts was on and Betts on the Angels. I mean, I think they're still in the same situation where Betts isn't getting the Angels to the World Series because baseball is the ultimate team sport. Everyone has to contribute, and you can't really blame that on Trout. And I know this last year they brought in Rendon and they still had Ohtani, but some injuries were on that team, and we'll see how it develops over the years. And I have to throw out this name real quick before we move on from baseball, but Drew, I know we were talking before. Barry Bonds is one of the greatest baseball players to ever step on the field, and you can't argue it. You were talking about Babe Ruth, all those stories about Babe Ruth, the folklore on Babe Ruth, how he was. Barry Bonds was logistically like the modern day Babe Ruth. He did everything, eclipsed him in home runs, and Barry Bonds is so frightening as a hitter people would rather intentionally walk him with the bases loaded
Yeah.
than throw a ball anywhere near the strike zone. He's that good. He was that good at the game.
Yeah,
He was.
And I mean, the crazy thing about Barry Bonds too, and I feel like the insane thing is this is brought up almost every single time he's discussed, is how good he was before the steroids. Like you could chalk him in 30 home runs, 30 stolen bases, and that's like crazy. You get like maybe one of those guys in the league every 20 years, and now current day baseball we've got, I mean, plenty. The talent's there, but that was so rare at the time to have a guy with that kind of power, that kind of speed. And he wasn't that bad of a fielder before he got way too big either. So I do think that he obviously is, like, in my opinion, maybe the greatest hitter of all time. But I think stuff like the steroids will, unfortunately, like, it might not in some people's eyes, but in the general public, I think it really, really hurts him. And that's why I think it's hard to argue him as the greatest in the sport, because technically cheated for a part of his career, even though a lot
On a
of people
technicality, maybe, but I mean,
I think
it's
cheating
just-
on it
it's-
is
I
sort of
think
the
it's
ultimate technicality.
I still think it's a great disgrace to the sport how he's not in the Hall of Fame. I hope he eventually gets there because he belongs there, because
Yeah, I do
baseball is a type of
understand the
sport.
argument.
Even if you take steroids, do you know how hard it is to hit a baseball and square it up?
It is.
Steroids don't help you do that. It might help you hit it a little farther, but for just hitting the ball, that's all skill. That's all Bonds.
It's
Oh, yeah,
the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of Rule followers.
Exactly. Exactly.
That is fair. And of course, all of these sports are incredibly hard to master, especially when we're discussing who's the best ever. But coming up after this quick break we're going to take, we've still got one more massive debate to get to. That's right, we're moving on to the NBA, so make sure you stick with us. Welcome back to the toss-up, and now it's time for perhaps the most intense debate, still grabbing headlines today. It's time to talk professional basketball. So, guys, I'm just going to start this one off with, we've got the big debate, Michael Jordan versus LeBron James. And I know there's plenty of discuss with this, and we have a special guest joining us today.
So before you guys get started, I've heard words like longevity. I've heard a bunch of stats. I've heard virtually every statistical category. 14th all-time in steals, 8th all-time in assists, 3rd all-time in scoring, 15-year prime, and he's still dominating. Four finals MVPs, four regular season MVPs, could and probably should be maybe one or two more. I mean, virtually every statistical category he leads in the playoffs. He's, most points, most triple doubles. You go the same for the finals. You guys might call him LeBron James. I just call him GOAT, and that's all I got to say. It's my piece. I wanted to make sure I got him his credit. I'm going to go ahead and step on it.
I really thought that was Udonis Haslem.
I don't think Udonis Haslem has that many Finals MVPs.
That
but
was
yeah,
where he got
that
me.
was Jevin McCoskey, ladies and gentlemen, our resident LeBron fan in here. But yeah, he wanted to bring the LeBron points to light. But Mike, I'll let you speak to who you think the best is, whether it be LeBron or Michael Jordan.
I hate this question. If we're being honest with you, this is like my least favorite question in all of sports, only because every time that someone gets asked this question, it feels like when they answer, their whole answer is trying to tear down one player instead of talking about why they think the other player is so good. You know what I mean? A lot of times you hear the Jordan fans go, "Oh, well, he isn't 3-6 in the finals, and he never had to build a super team to win his titles." Instead of going, "Oh, well, he beat Magic Johnson in the finals. He beat," you know what I mean? They don't really talk about his accomplishments. They almost talk about everything he didn't have to do that LeBron did. And then you go to the
very fair.
LeBron fans, and they talk about, "Oh, he had no help on his teams. He never had a Scottie Pippen." But then you look at it and you go, okay, those are the early Cleveland teams. I get that. I get why you're saying that's why he doesn't have as many rings as Jordan. But he was still maybe the most dominant basketball player on the planet for most of his career. You could make the argument there were maybe a couple years early where it was still Kobe, but he took over the whole NBA for the most part. And I think Jordan is the greatest of all time just because of sort of the table he set for NBA players. He made it possible so that they could be superstars who could market themselves. They could be international icons. They could be all this stuff. And it was because of how dominant he was on the court. And I really think that we don't get a LeBron James without a Michael Jordan. And now a lot of people could go further back and be like, okay, then you don't get a Michael Jordan without a blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But before Michael Jordan, no one had even come close to the level that he was as a superstar athlete and as a basketball player, both in terms of his skill and on the court. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I have to go Jordan just because I think it's the right answer, but LeBron keeps making it harder.
Stephen, where you stand on this issue?
I'm right in the same area. I mean, I'm Jordan, and so I'm not going to do what you did and pick apart LeBron, because you can realistically pick apart parts from both of them to try to make your case. But when you look at the best of all time, where does it really count? It counts in the playoffs, right? Michael Jordan is one of the greatest playoff players of all time. I know LeBron has his numbers, but Jordan is the only player in NBA history. I had to look this up. Only player in NBA playoff history to never score below 15 points in a playoff game in his career.
Wow.
The only player. He's never done it. He's always scoring at high clips. He also has the record for most 30-point games, 40-point games, 50-point games. Also holds the record for most points scored in a playoff game. And a lot of people like to knock on Jordan because in his early career, he didn't advance very far in the playoffs. He was going against Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics.
Yeah.
And in his second year in the league, he faced the Celtics and put up the highest score total ever, 63 points, in a losing effort. And so people like to knock on him for not getting it past. He had zero help. So he needed a Scottie Pippen, just like LeBron didn't have anything until he got his pieces. Jordan's the same thing. He needed his pieces to get where he needed to. And then once he got his pieces, him and his Bulls team were the best teams in the NBA. And he went 6 for 6 in the finals, MVP all those years, even 5 MVPs for himself. Got a couple Defensive Player of the Year awards. So he's a player on both sides of the court. I know LeBron's a great defender too, but Jordan's got 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards and 2 slam dunk titles. And LeBron, I'm sorry, is scared to do the slam dunk contest. He's afraid.
A lot of it is about the legacy.
It comes down to the slam dunk titles.
Oh, of course. And yeah, a lot of it is about the legacy and the sort of the persona that you've built up. But now, obviously, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, those are the 2 big names. The next big question is who's next? You could throw any amount of guys in there as 3rd best of all time or top 5 all time. Stephen, who is next after LeBron and Michael?
Immediately next, or can I just give a couple names? Because I've never really. It's
I'd
tough.
say throw out 2 or 3 rounds.
It's tough because we haven't sat down and really thought like at the top 5. I think you got to put Kareem up there for everything that he's accomplished in his career, with all the finals that he's got to, and then a teammate of his for a couple years, Magic Johnson, who's the greatest point guard in NBA history. Those 2 immediately come to mind, and you can throw out other names. I think Bill Russell you have to think of just because of all the championships. If you want to talk championships, then I think Bill Russell's a guy because he has just a staggering amount. He can't even fit all of his rings on both his hands. He has so many. So, I mean, those are 3 guys right off the cuff that come to mind. But, I mean, it's just so hard to argue when you have all the different time periods. Like Bill Russell was in a different time period than Kareem, and a different time period than Jordan, different time period than LeBron. But I think those 3 in their respective, eras of basketball, they were just at the pinnacle of it.
Right. And Mike?
I got to be honest with you. I think it's easily Kareem. I don't really think there's an argument for number 3. And I think it's disrespectful to Kareem that he's put as a distant 3. I really think if you look at all of Kareem's numbers, you look at the longevity of his career, you look at just how consistent, he was a 20 and 10 every night. You could just pencil it in. You could pen it in if you wanted. You don't even need to worry about erasing it. You're getting those numbers every single night, no matter what. The most unstoppable shot you've ever seen, the sky hook, literally unstoppable. No one in their right mind was able to get anywhere close to his arm when he would fully extend it like that. And I mean, when we talk about it, like longevity, stats, he has championships. He has everything you look for in an all-time player. And honestly, every time we have the MJ Jordan argument, I look at it and I go, if we're looking on big time, like the full resume, Kareem is in that argument to me. I really think it's a top 3 for the GOAT in basketball.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the take, and obviously Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has earned all of his accolades, done incredibly well. It definitely deserves to be near the top of that conversation. So now we're going to wrap the show with one last question, one quick fire. So you get about 20 seconds to explain your answer after you pick it. And Mike, we're going to start with you. Accumulating all of these sports that we've talked about today, all of the sports that we haven't even discussed, who is the best all-around athlete of all time?
Okay, well, since you said athlete, I'm going to go with Bo Jackson because I think there's been maybe one other person in all of sports history that can even argue Bo Jackson, and you mentioned him earlier, prime, Deion Sanders. I really think in terms of an athlete, it's being able to do incredible things at the highest level. And Deion Sanders, not only could he make those insane plays playing cornerback, but then he would just turn around and he'd go do it for the Atlanta Braves too. And I mean, same thing with Bo Jackson. You'd watch him just run over dudes' faces every single Sunday. And then he'd go out there, he'd hit a home run a country mile, and he'd just casually like climb up a wall to make a catch to save a home run. It's insane the athletic feats those two have had. And so best athlete of all time, I gotta go. No one knows Bo besides Bo, and it's Bo Jackson for me.
There you go. I like the pick. All right, Stephan. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds or less. I don't know if we're going to have the set collapse at the 20-second mark like it did for Mike, but I think it was a good timer. So, Stephan, what do you got?
This is another situation where I wish I went first because Bo Jackson's the clear-cut choice. You can't really argue Bo, but if I got to go someone else, it's going to be way back in the day, Jim Brown, who was unreal in the NFL as a running back, winning 3 MVP awards. And also, when he was in high school, he lettered in not 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5 varsity sports in high school. Obviously, he chose football, but I mean, realistically, he could have went anywhere he wanted to go pro, and he chose football and excelled at football. So, I mean, you can't top Bo Jackson. I don't know if anyone will ever top Bo Jackson, but I think Jim Brown, for everything he accomplished, he's got a case for 2, 3, 4 in the best athlete of all time department.
And who knows how we'd look at him if he played in the same time as Bo Jackson. You know, if he had the modern technology to train, the modern medicine to recover, like we could be looking at Bo Jackson times 10.
True. And
That's
we don't
how
even
a lot
know
of these old school guys
and
are.
we don't even know if Jim Brown had the opportunity to play multiple sports. Maybe he only chose to focus on football, but if he did both, maybe we'd be talking about him too.
Right.
Yeah, obviously plenty of incredible athletes out there, and there are plenty that we couldn't even mention today, but when it comes down to some of the greatest all time, I think that we hit a lot of the big ones. So that will do it for our show this week. But be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at IUSTV Sports and on Instagram at IUSTV Sports. You can always give any suggestions you may have for the show, ask any questions that you might have. Who do you think are some of the greatest of all time? So toss it up, find out if we'll catch it, and we'll see you next time.